After traveling to Solstheim and encountering a group of Nords known as the Skald, you are swept up in a strange prophecy, encountering stranger and stranger omens that are supposed to be warning signs of a cruel game. First, you were attacked by werewolves, who appeared suddenly on the island. After recovering from the attack and thankfully avoiding serious injury, you encounter another concerning sign, a pillar of fire on a lake of ice. Now this was not a normal fire. Instead, it looked to be there as if by magic. Not long after this, another strange sign would begin to occur. The tide of woe. Dead hawkers would wash up on the beaches, in large amounts, hinting an unnatural fate had met them all. As if this was not enough, when the sun would finally set, as you look up in the sky, the moon would be a horrifying shade of red, looking bloodstained. Exhausted from the terrors of this prophecy, you would seek the comfort of your bed. But as soon as your eyes would close, you would be awoken by a growling in your room. Werewolves! They disturbed your sleep to drag you to Hircine, who would say to you,
"You have arrived. The others have been here for days now, and you are the last. It is time for my hunt, and you are to take part."
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we will be discussing Hircine, one of the Daedra in Morrowind. More specifically, we will be answering the question why anyone would worship him. To do this, we will be going over several things. Firstly, who is Hircine and what are his aspects? After this, we will move on to why is Hircine important. So what events has he been involved in throughout the history of Tamriel? Then we will discuss what he is considered to be god over, along with how people worship him throughout Tamriel. Finally, we will discuss the prophecy involving Hircine and the curse or gift he has been known to bestow. All of this will help us understand why people may worship Hircine and why you may want to on your next playthrough. Now, we should begin with learning about who Hircine really is. Hircine is known as a Daedric prince and is considered to be one of the stronger or more important Daedra by ones like Azura, the Daedric Prince of Dawn and Dusk. In his humanoid form, he is often depicted with either the skull of an elk or an elk's head instead of a human head, with the rest of his body appearing human. He is one of the most worshipped Daedric princes throughout Tamriel. However, he never actually asked to be worshipped. Many still do because of the appeal he has to many, this being for several reasons. The first being his sphere in Oblivion. His realm within Oblivion is known as the Hunting Grounds. This, as you could have guessed, is an endless area of hunting grounds where the Daedric Prince, along with his huntsmen, spend their days hunting beasts, people, and even other Daedra in his realm. This realm is all about the thrill of the hunt. However, considering who or what could be hunted, sometimes this could be a little extreme. However, even with his love of the hunt, he does advocate for sportsmanship or a fair hunt, which is another reason he may be worshipped. Part of this is his law of the fair hunt. So this idea prevents cheating the prey or the hare, as it is called, out of a genuine chance to escape. He admires the hare that is able to escape, especially when the odds are stacked against them. This is the point of even seeking people out and testing them, rewarding those who pass his tests. Now, Hircine is also known by other names, this being based around his attributes. These names are correlated with the attributes coming from the Reach folk belief. The Reach folk are a group of humans from Skyrim. Other groups worship additional ones. However, there are 5 main aspects, the first of these being Hrokkibeg. Now this is the hunter. He is the aspect of guile, so this is cunning or clever deception. In this form, he carries the spear of bitter mercy, occasionally the spear of the hunter. Now Hrokkibeg's visits to Nirn's mortal plane can be for several reasons. It can be for him to find new prey to hunt, or he can be bringing prey from his realm in Oblivion into Nirn for those who worship him. However, if he does not happen to have prey animals around him, he is there for a different reason. He is in Nirn to select a hare for his next hunt. This is not exactly a position you wish to be in, as this hare is a person, not some little bunny hopping around the fields. Moving on to his next aspect, Hrokkibeg. This is the skin shifter, the man beast, or the wolf form of Hircine. He is who gave man the ability to skin shift. This was to remind those who were given the gift that they were no prey animal. they were instead predators. When visiting Nirn, this is who he visits, the skin shifters, as he sees them as his hunting companions. His howl in this form supposedly causes such fear that his prey become paralyzed, their innards frozen. He is who creates new werewolves. Moving on to Hrokkibeg, the Great Dark Stag. His purpose is twofold. To remove the weak from the herd, he lures prey into the herd and onto his hunting grounds, where they meet an untimely end, and also procreating either with female deer or pretty women who he transforms into deer, considering he is a deer in this form. There is also Hrokkibeg, the Quick Fox. He is known as a trickster. He is known to trick mortals into meeting their own deaths. However, he is not always an evil character. He does actually reward those he finds clever, teaching them new tricks and secrets. And finally, there is Hrokkibeg, the Mighty Bear, whose aspect is strength. When he visits Nirn, it is for very different reasons. He is there for peace and solitude. Those who disturb him don't live to tell the tale, unless of course they are bringing offerings of mead, where they are then blessed with the strength of the bear for the next fight. Now that we know about who Hircine is, we should discuss some of his legacy. So the events that involve this Daedric prince throughout Tamriel's time. We begin in the Merethic era, also being known as the era of myths. This is where we find an interesting story, this being the story of the Hircine. Now there is no date as to when this happened, but it is a journal entry written by them, giving their description of what occurred. In these journal entries, it discusses a time where the Peltless Ones, these potentially being elves, were hunting and killing the author's species and other similar species, the author being a sort of mix between human and deer. In the journal, the author discusses how they became the last of their tribe, their own son being killed as just a fawn. So the Peltless Ones were using unfair hunting tactics to pursue and kill off members of Hircine's tribe. Now the story of Hircine does provide an interesting potential origin for Hircine, the god of the hunt. However, this is speculation, as during the time of the myths, there was very little in the way of record keeping. So there is several ideas surrounding who this person could have been, including the idea that they may have been the person who went on to become the Daedric prince known as Hircine. The reason why the author may have become Hircine, the Daedric prince, is because he values a fair hunt. He only praises those who hunt fairly. We see in this account on the 8th day of Fawn's Cry, Hircine begins to hunt the hunters, getting revenge on those who hunted his tribe into extinction. There is also a hint in an earlier part of the journal that there may have been use of various unfair hunting tactics to flush Hircine's tribe out of the safety of their homes. This being what was written on the 30th day of Hare's Leap, a fire in the old growth near the village with the wind pushing it in their direction. Because of this, the tribe had to relocate closer to the river, which brings them closer to the Peltless Ones who happened to be hunting them, putting the group in more danger. Now, if this was purposely lit, then this could be considered an unfair hunt, using dangerous tactics to flush them out. They were after the land and wanted to make trophies out of those who were living there. Providing them nowhere to hide and no way to escape would be seen as going against Hircine's values, and if this is where the Daedric Prince originates from, we can see the basis for those values. Moving on from the story of Hircine and onto the First Era. This is where there would be several mentions of Hircine. The first coming from jewelry found that date back to the First Era. These jewelry artifacts being the shapeshifter chains, in this case the chain of the werewolf. This necklace has a symbol related to Hircine etched into it and can be found in Hircine's haunt, which happens to be an area housing several lycanthropes, so several people with the gift of Hircine. These chains are supposedly beneficial for those that are shapeshifters, and may be seen as a sign of the shapeshifters from the First Era, with similar chains also being made for other creatures like vampires. There are other mentions of Hircine in the First Era, this being with the story of Thane Icehammer in the mid to late 5th century of the First Era. This is documented as one of the earliest encounters that Hircine has had with other people. Now, Thane Icehammer was a Nord who was on a hunting trip to the Orgrim River basin. On this trip, he killed several lycanthropes, allegedly not knowing what they were. Now, the deaths of Hircine's kin deeply angered him and would lead to him taking revenge. Hircine would stab Thane Icehammer with the Spear of Bitter Mercy, but this would not kill him. Instead, the tip of the spear would break off, remaining inside of Thane Icehammer. This would lead to him slowly being driven insane, and with this insanity, it would lead to some terrible actions. Thane would go on to commit murder, this being of an acolyte of Kine, during one of his fits of rage. Kine being an important goddess to the Nords. Matron Icehammer, who was his wife, was ashamed and horrified by the actions of Thane Icehammer, and would order guards to take him away for his actions. However, he would manage to escape the guards. Thane would flee to an ancient Nordic burial site, and here he would be sealed inside, alive, by the guards as a punishment for his crimes. However, this would not be the end of Thane. He, of course, still having the tip of the Bitter Mercy lodged inside of him, would pass away and become a Draugr, wandering inside of the site. This became known as Icehammer's Vault due to the undead Icehammer wandering around the burial ground. He would eventually be put out of his misery in the Second Era by an adventurer. However, Hircine's anger was not only felt by Thane, but also the entirety of the Icehammer clan. They would experience much pain and hardship with their name dying out before the end of the First Era. Moving on to the last of events in the First Era that would involve Hircine. Now, this event is shrouded in mystery, as there is very little known about what actually happened. However, it is still an important event in the history of Hircine, and also Tamriel. This was, of course, in response to the actions of Molag Bal, who on the 19th of the Sun's Dawn in 2920, in the First Era, would destroy the entire city of Gilvardale overnight. This prompted a response from one of the three gods of the tribunal, this being Suthersil. Suthersil would call on 8 of the Daedric princes to help prevent such an event from happening again. One of these Daedric princes being Hircine, this being known as the Cold Harbour Compact. This compact had the Daedric princes present agreeing that they were not to directly meddle in the affairs of mortals. However, it is not known how the Daedric princes benefited from this agreement, as what they were given has remained secret. The Daedric princes are not allowed to directly appear in Nirn. However, they can appear through some intermediate form, like possessing people or communicating through statues. But anyway, moving on into the Second Era. This is with Hircine and the Hound. Now, this event comes from Hircine's obsession with the Green Lady. Hircine had desired the Green Lady as a trophy for many generations, this potentially being due to her representing the strongest of the Bosmer people. Bosmer were believed to be the strongest hunters on Nirn. Now, the Bosmer had chosen a new Green Lady, this being the Bosmer Gwyring. Being chosen for this position came with obligations, like her having to marry the Silvanar, who is the voice of the Bosmer people. Now, Gwyring's former lover, Ulthorn, did not take too kindly to this idea. He would become bitter and angry, and Hircine would take advantage over this. He would turn Ulthorn into a loyal follower of his. Ulthorn would become a faithful servant and a husk of himself, becoming known as the Hound. As the Hound, Ulthorn desired to take the Silvanar's position as the husband of the Green Lady. This, however, would lead to the Bosmer becoming more like their original selves, feral and uncivilized, as Silvanar represents the civilized part of the Bosmer, and the Green Lady represents the wild part of their people. Now, if Ulthorn was to be successful, he would turn the Bosmer into a group of feral beasts with an unquenchable thirst. Ulthorn, after his transformation into the Hound under the guidance of Hircine, would return to Wilding Run, his former home. With this return, he would begin to hunt and kill the people there for sport, basically wiping them out. Ulthorn, along with his hounds, would then continue on and take the city of Silvanar under their control. However, initially he was not successful in reaching the Green Lady, as there would be barriers enacted to prevent his progress. The Green Lady's husband would also be separated from her in this process, and in this he would call upon the Vestige, a hero whose soul was taken by Molag Bal, and his form walks without it. He would help to free the hostages taken by Ulthorn. Hircine would essentially bewitch the Green Lady, and Ulthorn would use this to his advantage to prevent the further freeing of the city. However, knowing that she had a warrior spirit, the Vestige would use this to his advantage, challenging her to a duel, which would take her away from Hircine's influence. Hircine and Ulthorn would be defeated in this instance. Now we move on to Bang Korai. Bang-Korai has some interesting history attached to it. Long before the Second Era, a man along with his wife and 7 sons and daughters would make Bang-Korai home. They would build a shrine to thank Hircine, as the area would have plenty of game for them to hunt. Hircine would appear to collect a token of devotion. He would ask the man to give up his children to prove how devoted he was to Hircine. The man, not exactly keen on this idea, would of course say no. After all, it was his children. Hircine would not take this rejection lightly, so he would curse this family, turning them all into trolls. The shrine would now be known as the Fallen Grotto, which would become an important site to the Glenmoril Weird, a coven of women witches who would inhabit the site. However, this is not where the story of the Fallen Grotto ends. Now in the Second Era, around the year 582, the Glenmoril Weird at this site would be attacked as a clan of the Reachmen, known as the Dark Witnesses, would attempt to claim the site for themselves. With the Reachmen having possession of the site, their lieutenant, Brynark, would seek to communicate with Hircine. He would ask Hircine to allow him to become a Briar Heart, which Hircine allowed. A Briar Heart, or a Briar Warrior, is basically a living weapon. They were skilled fighters prior to their hearts being replaced with poisoned seeds from Briar Heart trees. So yeah, don't mess with them. With the Reachmen clan taking over the shrine, Hircine would favour them, rather than the Glenmoril witches who had taken care of the shrine and had worshipped him there for many years. Hircine ignored their call until they would request help from an adventurer who would make contact with Hircine for them. Hircine, however, would only answer the adventurer when presented with the heart of one of the Weird Sisters. He found the self-sacrifice admirable and intriguing, presenting a challenge to them after this to regain his favour. The adventurer would have to defeat Hircine's aspects of guile, strength, and speed. The adventurer would succeed, and eventually the Briarheart would be torn from Brynark, offered to Hircine as a tribute by the Coven. This would bring them back into the favour of Hircine. Moving on to later that year. This is when Hircine would invite many mortals to join in a great hunt in his realm. A werewolf by the name of Vycosa would grow her werewolf pack to the largest that Tamriel had ever seen. Vycosa, however, felt slighted by Hircine, as she felt as though her and her pack had been invited to be the prey rather than the predators during this hunt. She so desired to use her pack to take revenge on Hircine and to take over Nirn. This is where she would send one of her most trusted lieutenants, Balrog, along with his pack to infiltrate the hunting grounds and spy on Hircine. However, this is not what Balrog did. He instead betrayed Vycosa, joining the Great Hunt. And of course, due to Balrog's behaviour in this hunt, attempting to cheat other members out of their victory, he would lead to Vycosa being killed by the true winners. Now we move on to the Third Era. This era starts with another great hunt, but this is not in Hircine's realm. No, instead it would be in the Chimera of Desolation, which is in a realm created by Mehrunes Dagon. This event would take place in the year 398. Mehrunes Dagon would take control of the Battle Spire, which would block the portal back to Tamriel, preventing all who were there, trapped there, not being able to return to Tamriel. The apprentice battle mages were unaware of this, with one of them ending up being chosen as the hare in the Great Hunt. The apprentice would not be alone, managing to find Chimere Greygin and befriending him. This Chimere would provide information that would turn the hunted hare into the hunter, providing the Saviour's hide and information about the Spear of Bitter Mercy, along with information about how to deal with Mehrunes Dagon. This would provide the apprentice with what he needed to slay Mehrunes Dagon, sending the Daedra into the void and allowing the apprentice to escape back to his own realm. Now we move on to the year 433. This is when the hero of Khajiit would summon Hircine and would be tasked with a difficult quest. He would be asked to kill what would be supposedly the last unicorn in Nirn. Now the unicorn was not wandering Cyrodiil's Arcane Grove without protection. No, the horned horse was much smarter than that. The unicorn had bodyguards in the form of minotaurs, protecting it from poachers and hunters that desired its prized horn. Now the hero of Khajiit would take on the challenge, and they would manage to successfully kill the unicorn, presenting the horn as an offering to Hircine, which in turn would be rewarded with the Saviour's hide. Now we move into the Fourth Era. This is where we see the Umbriel Crisis and Hircine's meddling in Prince Atrebus Mede's attempt to stop the city. During this crisis, Prince Mede, along with his group, would be passing through the hunting grounds, on their way to a destination on the other side of the realm. During this walk through the hunting grounds, as the day turned to night, the group would become prey of those hunting in the realm. They would see the figure of Hircine on the horizon. This could have spelt the end for all that were part of the quest, if it were not for a group of noble Khajiits from the Fa'aji clan who would come along on the journey. They stayed back once Hircine appeared to distract him and his hunters, allowing Prince Mede and the others to escape. The Khajiits that would remain behind would perish due to the hunters and Hircine. Now that we know about the events that Hircine has been involved in, we should discuss how he is worshipped by people throughout Tamriel. Hircine is the lord of the hunt and of man-beasts, and has been worshipped by various races throughout Tamriel. However, some are not so allowing of this worship. We see the ban on worship in the Ultima. The Ultima don't have anything specifically against Hircine, but instead they don't approve of anything to do with Daedra, attempting to distance themselves from these types of gods. This being to the point where summoning Daedra in the Somerset Isles is actually punishable by death. However, there are some Ultima that are known to worship Daedra, these being figures like Lady Ghislaine. She was a noble woman who was known for holding great hunting trips, these being, of course, away from the Somerset Isles. These hunts would have a variety of prey, with some even having humans as those who were hunted. This was to the point where she ran a kidnapping ring, so she would always have participants for her and her friends to hunt. Now moving on to the Bosmer. They have interesting beliefs surrounding Hircine. Hircine is a significant Daedra in Bosmer culture. He is worshipped during hunting for luck. But if we look at their beliefs surrounding shapeshifting specifically through the Green Pact, we see Hircine and his shapeshifters mostly being at odds with the Bosmer. As the Bosmer's Green Pact made with Jaffir, as part of this pact, the Bosmer were not allowed to shapeshift. This was actually viewed as going against the Green Pact, as the shape they had was given by Jaffir. There was only one exception. This was during the Wild Hunt ritual. Hircine is seen by the Bosmer people as wanting to return to the chaotic state of the ooze that everything originated from. Moving on to the Bretons. The Bretons split into two, this being with the Druids and the Weird Covens, when it comes specifically to the worship of Hircine. With the Druid part of the Bretons, Hircine is known as the Elk of Arrows, with some suggesting to Druids he symbolises the nature of life and death, or the connection between the hunter and its prey. However, he is not responsible for the Druid's ability to shift. This is instead attributed to Jaffir. On the other side of the coin, we have the Weird Covens. Those who come under the Glenmoril Weird are known as worshippers of Hircine. Depending on which coven will depend on what part of Hircine that they worship, with those from the Alessen and Viridian Weird Covens providing those who have lycanthropy as a curse with cures for their plight, as these groups worship his less feral and more civilized side. But others like the Hagfeather Coven, the Markath Sisters, and the Rimmerrock Weird worship the feral aspects of this Daedric Prince, valuing his more primal ideas. But there is only one group he will actually appear for when it comes to these covens, this specifically being the Glenmoril Coven of High Rock. All of the Glenmoril Weird are able to shapeshift. This gift of beast magic is due to their vast knowledge of Hircine and the surrounding mysteries of his domain. Moving on to the Imperials. They, like the Bosmeri, use the term half the conscience of man as a way of describing this Daedra. Now, worshipping him comes under one of the 16 acceptable blasphemies in Tiber Septim's empire. But depending on the type of Imperial depends on whether or not they were more inclined to Daedra worship. This being in the Second Era during the time of Integrum. Those who were Colovians would turn away from anything related to Daedra, as they held different religious values. However, those who were Nibonese were not exactly against the idea of Daedra worship, with many actually joining the religious practice. Most Imperials are not vocal about worshipping Daedra, as many consider it to be shameful. This is why many Daedric shrines can be found in the wilderness. An example of this is the Great Forest, which is where you can find Hircine's shrine. So there are very few within the Imperials who worship Hircine. However, there is permission through the Mages Guild to summon Daedra and utilize Daedra, so this is where the practice may be more prominent. Moving on to the Khajiits. They have their own beliefs surrounding the origins of Hircine, calling him by several names including the Hungry Cat, the Beast Prince, and the Spirit of Pursuit and Purposeful Change. His realm is that of hunting and skin changing to the Khajiits, and he is known for his cunning and ferocity by this group. He was born from the same origin as the other Daedric princes, this being the second litter of Fadomai and Ahnor. The Khajiits would even provide an explanation for the skull that Hircine wears, this being that it was actually due to him being heartbroken. So the skull Hircine wears, in Khajiit belief, is actually the skull of the Grat elk, who Hircine would take as a trophy, this being due to Nirn choosing Jafir instead of him. The Grat elk was Jafir's champion. Now Nirn and Jafir would have many children, these being the mortals throughout Nirn. But Jafir would become corrupted by the Daedric Prince Nirn. This would lead to him murdering Nirn, which would lead to several of the other Daedra, including Hircine, to kill him for this act. When it comes to the children of Nirn, Hircine has great affection towards them, but there is also an interesting speculation that some Khajiits have when it comes to her first litter, that they instead were the children of Hircine due to their shapeshifter tendencies, considering they were considered to be as changeable as moons. This idea is interesting considering the Khajiits' feelings towards lycanthropy. They're actually against Khajiits becoming werewolves, as they feel it goes against their religion to change their skins. Moving on to the Nords. Many of them also view the gift of Hircine in a negative light. The Nords view the gift of Hircine as an obstacle that may prevent them in reaching their afterlife of Sovngarde. This is due to the infection also affecting their soul. With their soul having the affliction, it is instead destined for a different afterlife, this being the hunting grounds that Hircine rules over. Some Nordic families like that of Djurgård Thanes from around Jorgrim River openly embrace the condition rather than seeing it like a curse, whereas others like the Skal see Hircine as more of a demon god who collects mortals as part of a prophecy to hunt them. They also view werewolves negatively, seeing it as a twisted mockery of the natural form of man. Now we move on to the Reachmen. This is a group that view Hircine in a better light. They, like the Khajiits, have a creation story involving Hircine. With this, Hircine would rise to prominence in their mythology through the sacrifice of Lork, as Lork had made a deal with Nymira to allow Lork to create a place within the infinite void for wayward spirits. This is where Hircine would become essentially the ruler of the world of flesh. With their respect to Hircine, we see interesting beliefs surrounding lycanthropy. It is not actually seen as a gift, nor is it seen as a curse, but like the Briar Heart, a condition to be endured for the good of the clan, which is why you can find many lycanthropes within the Reachmen clans. It is believed that much of the Dark Reach magic is actually drawn from Hircine. However, depending on the ritual, there may be other sources as well. Hircine was also worshipped by now extinct races. We see this with the practices of Nades. The Nedic people had various traditions used in hopes of gaining favour of Hircine. An example of this being those who had hoped to gain the favour of Hircine would paint themselves with symbols signifying him. Another example of this was their painting of bear cubs during their developmental stages, this being during the changes of the season and would be done to match the hunter that was their companion, highlighting the strong bond between man and bear. There are also carvings found related to the Nades tribe, with many having the symbol of the stag, which has been correlated with Hircine due to the symbol being of Hircine. Now that we know about the different groups being involved in the worship of Hircine, we should discuss the prophecy of Hircine, this specifically being the Bloodmoon prophecy. This is a legend that the Skal believe in which it is believed to occur once in every era. This prophecy claims that there would be 4 warning signs that occur before the main event. The first of these major events is the coming of the Hounds, this being the appearance of werewolves on the island where the Skal inhabit. These werewolves are part of his hunting party preparing for the Great Hunt, the second of these signs being fire from the Eye of Glass. This is where the frozen over Lake Fjording, has caught fire with a pillar of fire coming from the surface of the ice. The third part of this prophecy would be called the Tide of Woe. This is where you would see the large groups of dead hawkers washing up on the shores of Solstheim. The final warning of the Bloodmoon prophecy is, of course, the Blood Moon that provides the namesake for this prophecy. This moon is the secunda or Done, turning crimson red, is supposedly symbolizing the blood of the prey that Hircine and his hunters have claimed. These 4 signs are not problematic in themselves, they are instead a warning sign of Hircine. Depending on the era will depend on who Hircine will come to claim. In some eras, he only claims one man as the hare in his game. In others, he will grab an entire tribe to hunt. This hunt most often takes place in Hircine's realm. However, not always. As with the apprentice, it was instead in the realm of Mehrunes Dagon. The first part of this hunt will involve the prey navigating obstacles to find Hircine and to challenge him in battle. In the case of the Naravarine, this obstacle was a maze filled with aggressive werewolves and beasts. After making it through the obstacles, the challenger often must take on one of his forms and succeed in defeating it for their freedom along with a reward. There is another so-called gift that Hircine is known to give his followers, this specifically being that of the skin shifting. Hircine is known as the father of all werebeasts, with only a few forms being seen throughout the games. However, many other forms are documented, like that of the were-lion, who are said to exist in wet regions in places like Cyrodiil, Elsewhere, and Black Marsh. The gift of the were-creature was supposedly given to the first to worship Hircine and are viewed as his most loyal followers or even his children. The story behind werewolves is that Hircine meddled with the nature of wolves, making them susceptible to shape-shifting. This nature mixed with human nature provides the basis for werewolves. The gift of Hircine provides those with it with several attributes outside of shape-shifting. They have increased strength, stamina, speed, and resilience, this making them both the better hunters but also better fighters. So why would anyone worship Hircine? Well, that really depends on several reasons. In the simplest sense, many within Tamriel worship him as an attempt to grant themselves additional luck during a hunt. However, there can be a deeper meaning to the worship of Hircine. Some, like the Reachmen and the Khajiit, view Hircine as an important part of the creation of Nirn. Hircine being an important part of the ebb and flow of nature, a step in the cycle of life and death. Almost as the thin grey line that separates, as with the death of the prey, the life of the hunter flourishes. Without the hunter, the prey would end up overpopulating and destroying the natural habitat. So he is in a sense the being of balance. Considering that he neither favours the hunter nor the prey, he is known to reward both the hunter who succeeds in a fair hunt and the prey who of course escapes against all odds. Others worship him for reasons like that of those who desire to continue as lycanthropes. Those who view this as a gift rather than a curse and see the afterlife it brings as ideal, provides a chance to live on hunting with Hircine and continue their ways. In life, some may view it as having many benefits, especially to those who have been granted tools that allow them to further control their were-creature forms. The Glenmoriel Weird covens being different in the shifting abilities rather than being were-creatures, they possess beast magic due to the worshipping of Hircine. These shifting groups may view themselves as more one with nature than those who do not have these abilities, with the Glenmoriel Weird having an emphasis on the balance when it comes to nature and the taking of life, so they may view their worship as a way to better work with nature. So let me know in the comments if you would worship Hircine. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll enjoy this one. It is about the tribunal gods, their influence over the people of Morrowind, and whether or not they are the true villains of Morrowind.